Thank you guys for joining us for this segment. We're here with our next live guest. We've got Frank Dreischerf joining us from R2 Logistics, talking a little bit about what's going on in the LTL space. Thank you for being here this morning.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
So, Frank, obviously we know that the LTL market has had quite the shakeup from the end of the summer. Yellow, of course, went out of business. They have gone bankrupt. They have now lost over 22,000 drivers, Union Pacific, over 30,000 employees, and a big chunk of capacity has come out of the market. What trends are you guys currently seeing, and how has this Yellow departure started to impact how you guys are working?
Absolutely, yeah. The YRC bankruptcy is probably the biggest thing to happen in the transportation universe in probably the last 20 years. Without question, YRC has roughly been a dying patient for a very, very long time. And finally this year they gave up the ghost. What that is creating is a massive void in the LTL markets. YRC, by some estimates, handled up to 15% of the overall market share of LTL transpiring in the United States. There really hasn't been a new LTL carrier to hit the markets in the U.S. to start business in the United States in the last 25 to 30 years. Nobody really of note. So the reality is that market share is going to flow to other carriers. Now, YRC was very, very heavy in the retail markets, and the carriers that were also heavy in the retail markets are feeling a lot of that pinch first. We saw in the opening weeks and days right after the bankruptcy and they ceased operations, we started seeing carriers saying, hey, we can't take any more freight in certain lanes, right? We started seeing carriers getting overloaded. And as shippers started making the next best decision that they could possibly make, one of the blessings and curses of technology is it speeds up the pace of decision making. That's a blessing. The curse is now everybody is making the same rational decision at roughly the same time. So that's creating a cascading effect throughout the LTL industry where carriers are getting overloaded, then they're begging out a freight that they don't want, which is moving on to the next best available carrier down the waterfall list until finally that entire 15% of market share gets absorbed. Yeah, one of the unusual pieces about YRC is they still ran a hub and spoke model, which is fairly different than how most national LTL carriers today are starting to run their businesses. So a lot of the YRC property that's available are small 30, 40, 50 door terminals, which are not as desirable as the 100 to 150 door terminals. And YRC had a very, very big footprint and a lot of underserved markets. So we're seeing a lot of partner carrier usage type thing, a lot of national carriers that are partnering with smaller local or regional, not even super regional, but regional players in order to affect delivery, for instance, in the western states. This is degrading service all across the board. We're seeing service degradation across some of the lower priced carriers that were the next best available alternative to YRC. We anticipate that those service levels will come back over time as they're able to absorb that incoming freight and new levels of freight. But carriers are, on the whole, on a massive hiring spree to try to deal with that 15% of the market share that's now being spread across the remaining available players.
One of the interesting things that we've watched here at FreightWaves and been able to track through our data is kind of this LTL pricing and the ripple effects that we've seen in that pricing as Yellow has exited and some of those other carriers absorb their freight and absorb their market share. And it's caused this kind of short-term spike in prices. And I think a lot of folks are wondering, okay, is this going to be something that lasts through peak season? Is this going to be something that's just kind of like a blip and a ripple effect and then will fall back down? And that kind of leaves shippers wondering, how do I navigate this right now, right? Am I planning for something that's a longer term challenge, or am I looking at dealing with this in the short term and then going back to my typical strategy to kind of manage my Q4 into the end of the year freight? Is there any one particular strategy that shippers can really use to overcome some of those challenges, or are they hoping to kind of hold out and just kind of wait and see what happens when the dust settles?
Well, it depends upon the shipper, right? And the reality is shippers that have forged very, very good relationships with either directly with the carriers or with the 3PLs that they work with are in a much better position than shippers who have historically looked at this business as purely transactional. The purely transactional shippers are going to see some fairly large price increases over time between, roughly, 4 weeks ago until the end of the year. The shippers that have been more strategic in building their relationships and working with their carriers in a more partnership environment, while they may see some increases, it's certainly not going to be to the degree that the tactical shippers will.
So it's going to be interesting to watch for sure how folks kind of navigate now these big time changes. When we're talking about working with a partner like what you guys do at R2, how can shippers now leverage partnerships like with a group like you guys and the technology that you guys offer? You've got that R2 TMS. How do they leverage both of those things to help make that decision-making process easier? You mentioned technology, right? Easier, more available to do, more quickly to make decisions. How does that partnership leverage now work, and where can they go to kind of get that set up?
Sure. So the first place that they can go to get that set up is r2logistics.com. From our TMS standpoint, our TMS operates similar to Expedia, right? We're essentially the Expedia of LTL. You connect in with us, type in your shipment details, and we'll bring back pricing ranked from lowest to highest, also cataloging carriers by service as well, and anticipated delivery times or transit times. And it really makes it very easy for a shipper to then find the right carrier, the right level of service in order to affect their shipment. So that's number one, right? If you're not operating with a technological solution today, if you're still operating off of, God forbid, Excel spreadsheets and back of the napkin routing guides, you're really in a bad spot right now. Our TMS was specifically designed for shippers with roughly $10 million or less in total LTL spend. It gives them the tools of a larger TMS that probably they couldn't afford given the size of their overall business, and allows them to compete with much larger players in terms of both pricing and decision making. That's one. Number two is partnering with a 3PL provider such as us, who is going to do one thing, and that is look out for your operation's best behalf, right? Look out for your best interests. And the way that we do that is by educating not only your personnel, but also looking for any mistakes that might be made in the tendering process, whether that is accidentally tendering 10 pallets for pickup, which is going to lead you to over or excessive length charges, which can turn a $700 shipment into a $7,000 shipment. Our operations personnel are specifically trained to look for those sorts of instances, to everything from negotiating and arguing discrepancies in the billing. We see a significant number of billing discrepancies from every carrier on a daily basis. And if you don't have the tools, if you don't have the technology, and more importantly, you don't have the people that are trained to manage that LTL spend at a shipment level, you're certainly going to be incurring some hidden charges that you not only didn't know were there, but have no idea how to correct.
The best strategy is, of course, good teamwork, I think, when it comes to navigating the craziness of the industry. Frank, thank you guys so much for joining us today on our show. Again, you mentioned if people want to get in touch with you, your website, but if people want to reach out to you directly, can they do so through email?
Absolutely. My email is fdreischarf at r2logistics.com. That's FDREISCHARF at r2logistics.com.
And thank you guys for staying tuned. We're going to take a break and we'll be right back.